I don't understand the terminology manager. You manage a bank account, you manage a mortgage, you don't manage people. And a manager marks the homework, a coach helps you achieve the best results. So what is a manager's function? A manager's function is to help the people that they serve, their subordinates, become their best selves, and leaving the ego at the front door and being in an environment where they feel safe, that they're not fearful that someone's going to take their job and all the things that go around all this historical nostalgia over the years of command and control.
Here's a pre-show scenario for you. Imagine you had to visit 16 houses just to cook your dinner. One place has the pots and pans, one has the stove, another has the food. You get the idea. Sounds ridiculous, right? Well, the reality is most global businesses operate the same way, using 16 different tools to hire, pay, manage, and develop their workforce. But now there's one platform that does it all. Deal. That's DEEL. Deal is your forever people platform built for global payroll and HR. So whether you're an enterprise business, a small company, or something in between, Deal works for your entire team. So are you ready to transform your global payroll and HR processes? If you are, click the link in the show notes to book a demo with Deal today. That's DEEL. Hello and welcome back to another episode of the HR L&D podcast. I'm your host. My name is Nick Day. I'm CEO at JGA Recruiting Group, and we are specialist HR recruiters. Now, if you're new to this show, welcome. This is the show that takes a deep dive into all of the latest insights happening in the world of people management, HR, and of course, learning and development. I'm bringing you interviews with leaders who are changing the game when it comes to people and culture. And today, we'll have a guest who's going to do exactly that. In fact, they already are. Best-selling author, and we're going to be talking today about employee engagement and well-being. And I'm going to be really thrilled to introduce you all to Jeff Doing. Now, he is an internationally acclaimed keynote speaker. He's a top 50 workplace leader, and he's the CEO of Cloudfm Group. As I mentioned, he's also written a best-selling book, and he's the author of Doing the Opposite, while he challenges conventional thinking to achieve extraordinary results. I'm going to find out all about that book and some of those insights during the course of today's episode. He's also going to be sharing some of his fascinating insights from some of those signature keynote talks. I will give some links at the end of the show where you can find these and watch them for yourself. But one of those in particular that stood out for me was a keynote titled The Way You Make Me Feel, Recruitment and Retention on Steroids. And of course, that's something that's very close to my heart. So today, let's find out exactly how leaders can create a workplace that delivers meaningful positions, meaningful work, and fulfillment that goes way beyond just a pay slip. So without further ado, Jeff Doing, welcome to the HR L&D podcast. How are you feeling today?
Well, thanks very much, Nick. I'm pleased to be here, and wow, energy. Can't wait.
I can't wait to get started. This is something that's really close to my heart. Everything. We're talking about recruitment on steroids. We're talking about employee experience, engagement, well-being, what is not to like. Before we dive into that, though, you know what's coming. First question I ask all of my guests, which is this: what do the words human resources mean to you?
Well, it's interesting because, I'm pretty clear. Human resources is a group of people or a person that is responsible for guiding businesses and managers on the right journey for the way in which we engage, we look after, we protect, we enhance our people. A lot of people in my journey have thought that human resources are the people that solve problems for you while you walk away because you can't deal with them. Human resources is a information platform to tell and to help you understand how to manage your people. So human resources for me is very, very important, but it's important that it's run in the right way for the right purpose.
Yeah, nice. What a great place to start. I know this kind of links quite nicely to something I saw in one of your keynote talks. I'm sure you talk about in your book as well, which is that it's a timeless truth that people join companies, but they leave bosses. So with that in mind, how do you motivate employees? What steps can the people that listen to this what can they take to help transform those managers into kind of coaches that really focus on the individual?
Great question. And listen, the things I say in my talks, particularly, is that I don't understand the terminology manager. You manage a bank account, you manage a mortgage, you don't manage people. And the way in which you do is it's about, a manager marks the homework, a coach helps you achieve the best results. So what is a manager's function? A manager's function is to help the people that they serve, i.e. their subordinates, become their best selves. And leaving the ego at the front door and being in an environment where they feel safe, that they're not fearful that someone's going to take their job and all the things that go around all this historical nostalgia over the years of command and control. How do we get managers to behave like coaches. And therefore, the things I say to businesses are, stop trying to eat the elephant. Stop trying to motivate an organization with all of its people. Focus all of your attention on your managers becoming coaches. Create consistency in the way in which you deal with people. Create a safe environment and have one job. Your job is to make the people that you serve the best that they can be in the safest possible environment known to man.
Fantastic. So you mentioned an animal in that answer. It may become something come to mind. So bear with me here. You mentioned an elephant. And someone once said to me, Nick, are you an elephant or are you a hippo? Now, an elephant has a big ears and a tiny mouth. And a hippo, of course, has a huge mouth and tiny ears. And you know what? That was a really simple visual I've kept with me now for about 5 years. But it makes sense, right? And from a coaching standpoint, you mentioned managers, the command and control. It doesn't work in the modern workplace. People don't want to be told and directed on how to do things in that regard. They want to be empowered. The way of doing that is to speak to your employees. So how would you do it? What do you want to do? How can we get you there? Which is more of a coaching mindset. So in the work that you've been doing, where have you really, again, if you even maybe have some real life examples of where you've seen that coaching mindset really give some good tangible results?
Well, the first thing that you have to do, and listen, I'd say to people, look, how do we solve this problem about attracting the right talent, retaining the right talent? How do we do that? But it all starts with one thing. And I say, is there a silver bullet? Or there's no such thing as a silver bullet. And then my next statement is, or is there? And there is a silver bullet, but it takes us right back to basics. You know, everyone spends all their time addressing the symptoms, never the root cause. And if you focus your time on the root cause, you nurture the soil, all your plants will grow. So you've got to nurture the soil, not keep changing plants because that was a bad plant, right? What is the soil like? And of course, that's culture. So how do you focus on culture? And I say to people, you know, how many cultures have you got in your business? And they say, well, I don't know, 1, 5, 10. I said, how many managers have you got? 35. Then you've got 35 cultures. So how do you create an environment where everybody has bought into the culture, the values of the organization, where we all behave in the same consistent way? So when you talk about a real life example of coaches, it's about that ability to create this safe and psychological safe environment where a manager truly just wants his people to be the best that they can be. And if that means they overtake them and they go to a whole new level, that is their role. That's their function. I'll give you one example, real life example, where it's all about career paths, right? One of the most important things that people need is a clear career path. And one of the things that managers fail to do is they'll say, well, look, what do you want to be? They say, well, I want to be a finance director. Well, there's no point in us talking about that because we've got a finance director. So there's no point in us taking you on that because there's no openings. And they think, oh, God, you're so wrong. Your job is to train that person to become a finance director. And if there are no functions available or roles available in your organization for that person to become a finance director when they're ready, your job is to help them find a finance director role somewhere else. That is our job, right? This is about growing and nurturing people. And when you actually get people to understand that and believe that, and that you've set a career path that everyone's laser focused on, they've got clarity. And when they've got clarity, they run through brick walls.
And it takes away that glass ceiling as well, doesn't it? Right? People know that they can be developed, they can be invested in, irrespective of whether someone is above and below them or somewhere else, right? Which I think is quite exciting. I think something that I've seen change significantly in the world of recruitment. You talked more about there about talent succession planning, if you like, is that when I first started, I would actually say that most people would move for salary. You know, I worked in payroll recruitment, my main industry, right? And the first no says to me, Nick, what's it paying? If it's paying more, I'll consider it. If it's not, that has completely changed. And since in 20 years, I've been doing recruitment. The Great Resignation, we saw that in huge numbers. People weren't moving for money; they're moving for better work-life balance, for more flexibility, more adaptability, a more culturally aligned business for them to thrive in. Using your analogy, different plants thrive in different soils, right? So one doesn't work for one, but works somewhere else. And saw people start to make that shift. And I know that you mentioned there are 3 key things that people are moving up for now, but that are more important than salary. And you mentioned empowerment, autonomy, and mastery. Tell me a little bit more about those.
So every human being, bar none, want 3 things: autonomy, mastery, and purpose, right? That to a great or lesser extent, every human being on the planet needs those 3. They have to influence or control their destiny. If no one wants to be told what to do, right? They never have. So as much as we say the times have changed, well, the argument is they've never really changed. Everyone's always wanted the same thing, but we've ended up having to adapt in a process that says You're going to do as you're told, otherwise you're going to be fired, or you're going to be, ostracized, or you're going to be whatever. So we just had to play with that game until eventually the millennials, Gen Z, Gen Ys shook us up and said, "What on earth are you doing?" And then COVID accelerated it. So it's the realization that says we have got to create an environment that says, how do we get people to be their best selves? This is not about you should be lucky you've got a job. This is about we should be lucky to have you, right? How do you change the narrative? And if you give people autonomy, genuine autonomy in a safe environment, and you give them mastery. So, I play golf every week. Now, I'm going to play golf on Saturday. I'm not playing with the absolute clarity that I want to play worse than I did last time. I clearly want to improve, right? Now, whether I do improve or not is another matter, but I'm doing it to get better. People that play guitar a weekend, they're not being paid to play guitar. They're doing it because they want to improve. It's a natural element. The wife cooking a meal for the family and cooks the same meal a week later. She wants it to be a better meal. That's just the way we're wired. We want to improve. So you have to give people the opportunity for mastery. And then purpose is everybody wants to do something and contribute something that is bigger than themselves, which is why you've got thousands and hundreds of thousands of volunteers who are building mud huts in Cambodia without being paid. In fact, they're spending their own life savings doing it because they're contributing something bigger than themselves. In Portugal, where I live, 95% of the fire brigade across the country that are fighting fires every year are volunteers. So it's the realization that says if you can nourish autonomy and you can nourish the ability for them to apply mastery, and you can actually get them into an environment where they can clearly see their actions are contributing to something bigger than themselves, then you're on a journey to a massively engaged workforce.
Yeah, I love that. It reminds me of a Chinese proverb. I can't know if I get this exactly right. One of these things, if you want to be happy for an hour, sleep. Want to be happy for a day, fish. Happy for a year, inherit a million, but happy for a lifetime, give to others. And that's kind of, that links to that purposeful piece. But I think something that I've seen change in the world of HR to bring it back is in order for people to have more purpose, often that does link to hobbies. Maybe it's golf, maybe it's guitar, maybe it's work-life balance, being there for the kids. And with that, in an HR context, often requires a significant amount of flexibility. And we've seen flexibility shift the workforce dynamics quite considerably over the last couple of years in particular. How do HR people that are listening to this, they want to have a culture that does give people purpose, that does give them empowerment and autonomy? How do they navigate that with flexibility as well? Because it can be a challenge.
It can be, and if it's not driven from the top, then you will be pushing water uphill, especially from an HR perspective. So whatever you're going to do, whatever changes you're going to make, it has to be driven from the top. The top have to believe in it. Otherwise, it's like pushing a square peg for a round hole. So in our world, we used COVID to accelerate what we believed. So I'll try and bring this to life a little bit. We are very much an organization that had 7 offices. Everyone's in the offices and everyone turns up at 8:30 and everyone leaves at 5:30 unless you're very ambitious, you work till 8 o'clock because you think that's going to make a difference, right? So that's the world we've all been living in for many, 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 many years. COVID came along and created the Great Resignation because it done something that no one had ever experienced in their life before. It gave them time to think. And then they reflected on what is the life I'm living? What life do I want? And that created the Great Resignation. And what people did was they realized that never, ever worried about salary. No one has ever worried about salary. They've worried about other things that they think salary fixes, right? So essentially, provided they're being paid the right amount of money, it's never about salary. There's some other reason that salary is used to fix the problem. And I love that there was just a little flyer came out on LinkedIn a couple of weeks ago, and it said, salary satisfies you for an hour, or an increase satisfies you for an hour. Culture satisfies you every day. It is about truly about understanding people. So what we have found is we moved because of COVID to an entirely remote environment, 100% remote. We got rid of 5 of our 7 offices, and we refitted 2 of them to be collaboration centers. And the only reason you go to the office is to solve problems, be creative, and have fun. Everything else you do at home. And you are autonomized to decide when you and all your teams get together every 3 weeks, every 6 weeks, every 12 weeks, whatever it is that you're trying to do and how you're trying to manage it. You own what you do. And then people, when they turn up on that 4 or 5, 6 week cycle, they don't say, "Good morning, how you doing, John?" They cuddle. It's a much more richer experience. It's far more intimate than the coffee machine that said, "How was your weekend?" And then you start to tell them how your weekend was. "Sorry, I've got to go. I've got a meeting." There was just no intimacy. It was valueless. So what's now happened is people have got that autonomy and the ability to choose to do what they want. I then move on to say, and you said it a little while ago, work-life balance. Who's heard that phrase? And of course, everyone puts their hand up. What is life balance? Well, work-life balance is when you are constrained. When you have got pure autonomy over what you do and how you do it, there is no longer work-life balance. There's just life, right? You're going to manage your life in whatever way you choose to because you've got the autonomy to do so. Now, to bring that to life, when we came back from COVID and we said, look, how do we get our teams to behave in a way that is beneficial to them and to us? And we started saying we can write some policies, send some memos out, do some videos. And I thought, well, yeah, but they're not really going to believe it. So the way we tried to manage this was we also brought this into mental health and well-being, which has been buzzwords, obviously, for a number of years. And I just sat down and thought, what is it that's causing this stuff? Now, clearly there are people that have got real challenges, and I'm not undermining that in any way, shape or form. But I spoke to a lot of my teams that had young children particularly. And I said, are you stressed? I mean, of course you're stressed. Why are you stressed? Well, this week I've had to ask my manager 3 times for permission to leave early because my husband's stuck in London. I've got to pick the kids up from school. And each time I ask, I'm stressed because, it's going to do me head in. And then thirdly, on the 4th attempt, my manager said to me, look, can't you ask your husband this? 3 times you've done it now. You're setting a precedent. It's going to challenge the other people in the business, blah, 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 blah. That is stress. And on top of that, she goes up and has a row with her husband for dropping her in the shit. So all the time, this is creating stress. So we decided when we returned from COVID that we were going to change the behavior of how we think about stuff. And we said, for clarity, if you do not drop your kids off at school, you will be fired. If you do not pick up your kids from school, you will be fired. So there was absolute clear messaging around the fact that your family comes first. And by you managing the stresses and strains of your life, of the things you've got to do, and you decide how you're going to deliver the outcomes that we've all agreed as an organization, you choose. And then I spoke to that particular individual about 3 or 4 months later after we'd executed this, where everyone thought, Jesus, this is unbelievable. And she said, all my stress has gone. My mental health is on a high. I feel in control. I've not got stress about asking money for permission. And guess what? I've suddenly started to like my husband again. So all these things are driven by the constraints we apply when we're asking people to do a specific job that we think should be done this way.
And I would have made the assumption that a happy employee, as this individual now is probably way more productive as well, because a motivated employee is a more productive employee. And these are some of the hidden benefits of getting that, whatever you want to call it, that balance right. For me, I'm a fan of the work-life balance term. I don't mind admitting that straight off the bat. For me, I think the human experience is often in pendulum format. We can swing one way or the other, and we need a little bit of structure in there. I would say that the way you've presented that, where you've driven them much structure, that is a rule I want to put in place to say you do that for your kids because that comes first. It's still helping us with that. I remember, I say this because in the pandemic, when everyone was able to choose, they had a hybrid work started coming back in, and people said, you can come in 1 day a week and you choose when it was. And of course, no one then, people either went in too much because they're worried they weren't seen enough, they didn't know how to respond to that, or they would go in and miss the manager because the other manager decided to go in on a different day. And we need a little bit of structure sometimes to make sure that people are still in tune with the temperature and the whole kind of the environment of the office and the culture as well. So that's a personal thing in the word balance, but the example you gave is fantastic. What it does is it highlights that a motivated employee who's reduced that level of stress, it's someone who can really get that level of high performance, which is what we want from all of our teams. In high-performing teams, are profitable teams, are happy teams, and good cultures. I read in some of your work prior to, in my research, Jeff, to this, that at Cloudfm, well-being for you now isn't just a policy. You said it's actually part of our DNA. You kind of highlighted some of that there in some of the things that you've done. I wonder if you can just go into a bit more detail about how you made that shift, really. Maybe it was always there, but it sounds like to have that kind of wording behind it, but must have been a bigger shift because you know what? This is now who we are.
Hello, HR and people leaders. Are you exhausted of the war for talent cliche? The problem is when we hear a cliche, it usually exists for a reason. However, we think it's time for a fresh approach to the talent crisis. That's because at JGA Recruitment, we understand the real challenges you face in sourcing phenomenal HR and people candidates. And guess what? We think we have the solution. Our team is on a mission to revolutionize your hiring process. That's because we're not just recruiters, we're strategic partners dedicated to finding HR and people professionals who align perfectly with your company's vision and goals. So let's break the cycle of frustration together. Partner your talent acquisition strategies with JGA Recruitment and experience the difference in service, excellence, and results. No longer do you need to suffer the costs associated with a poor hire, because with over 100 five-star Google reviews and already trusted by many of the world's leading brands, why don't you take action today? Contact us at jjrecruitment.com to discover how we can help transform your HR and people teams. And here's a bonus. When you visit us, you can sign up for our weekly HR newsletter that's packed with invaluable industry insights and more. Let's revolutionize your HR talent acquisition strategies together and make the war for talent a cry from the past. Visit jjrecruitment.com to find out more.
Well, listen, coming back from a command and control environment, which is how we was all brought up, we thought that's how we run business. That's, managers were about hierarchy, about, we know best, you learn from us, and, do as you're told, and all these things that we were all brought up in during our own careers. And I'll never forget, and I'm sure you've heard this, and I'm sure the listeners have heard this, how many times have we said, leave your personal problems at the door? Businesses just repeated that every minute of every day. I don't care if you just got up from your husband or your wife. I don't care if your kids are ill. That's personal problems. You leave the personal problems at the door. The reality is not a single human being on the planet can leave their personal problems at the door, because it affects the way they operate, how they think, their stress levels, their anxiety. It affects everything. So why don't we actually say, let's be a little bit more vulnerable and respect and understand the fact that if we were actually there to listen and where appropriate help, if we can help, those people through those journeys, then suddenly what you're doing is you are massively contributing to their well-being, because the golden rule of saying a problem shared is a problem halved and all this sort of stuff. But don't say to people, and those that choose to not discuss their personal affairs, whatever, is still absolutely in their choice. But what's amazing is when you create that psychologically safe environment where people genuinely care and you've got genuine demonstration of empathy, everybody will open up because it's a safe environment. And before you know where you are, you've got scenarios where people are saying, they're feeling they've just grown another 3 inches because they feel so safe and so supported.
Yeah, you mentioned community. I think it's so important, and I agree. We need a psychologically safe environment to build that community of trust. I had Stephen Covey on the show, and we need trust will bring inspiration. Trust is the most important thing, he would argue, in any team dynamic. And to do that, you need psychological safety, and you should be okay to bring some of your problems in. We spend so much time at work that some people will say work is my second family, right? And there's a element of truth in some organizations, and that's the way that people are, and you need to be able to share and feel safe. I know from your perspective, and I'm glad you mentioned it, because I was going to ask, and maybe people listening to it, maybe it popped into their heads, but when you make things too comfortable, but I'll later on go over this in a minute, sometimes it can have an impact on the level of resilience. What I would say in your response there is actually you highlighted how community can build resilience, and resilience spans beyond, just making things comfortable. But I know you've got a real view on this, because I know you focus on resilience from an emotional, social, physical, spiritual, and mental health kind of prism, if you like, of all these different places. Tell me a little bit more about your approach to resilience and building holistic resilience.
So again, we're back to taking people on a journey and the 5 strands of resilience. So it's that ability to get people to hone in on stuff they would never hone in on. When you talk about what created the Great Resignation, it's because something happened that none of us experienced before. We were given time to think. We've never had to, I love the Henry Ford saying, it says, thinking is very difficult, which is why so few choose to do it. And, and we don't realize the value of reflection, right? So the same thing applies here. When I say to somebody, right, well, here's 5 bubbles around a shield. The shield is your spiritual, right? What is your emotional? And what are your 5 strands? What matters to you and what you're going to do for yourself and for your team and for people around you? What are your 5 strands? And it's something that people have never asked you to think about. And then suddenly when you start thinking about it, you suddenly get clarity. And when you have clarity, you've got the ability to actually behave in that way and focus on those 5 things. It's the same as values. We'll all sit and say, I've got values. If I ask people to name their 3 values, their 4 values, most people would struggle to do that. They know what they think is right, what they think is wrong. But if you ask them to articulate their actual values, they would struggle until you ask them to sit down and focus on them. If you had to articulate your values, what would they be? And it's all about giving people time. It's all about giving people guidance to give them clarity, because without clarity, you have anarchy. So how do you create an opportunity where you give people the opportunity to create their own clarity? And then, of course, that then leads into things like the values. And we say to a business, yeah, what's your values? And they'll go, our values are A, B, C, D, and E. And I'd say, well, that's interesting because companies can't have values. Companies are a thing. They're an object. They're not a thing. They're not real. They don't breathe. A company's values are the sum of the people's values. And therefore, if you know what you think you want to behave like in terms of a set of values, then you've got to recruit people that drive and own and believe in those values. What you can't do is say, these are our values, but you've suddenly employed all these people that have got the complete opposite values. So this is all about chaos. And how do you create certainty, and how do you create consistency? And more importantly, how do you create clarity for everybody to move forward as a community?
It's a really interesting view on the values piece. It's not not a perspective I've heard on the show before. And I've had a lot of HR leaders talk about the importance of values. So I find that quite interesting. I think I'm going to take the opportunity to take your advice and reflect on that and have an all think about it. What I thought was quite interesting in your response there, when you talk about people sitting down and understand what their values are for themselves, I would imagine if someone took that space to do that, 99% of them would later reflect and probably change at least one of them, because we tend to do that, right? So that's another opportunity for to highlight the importance of that reflection element. And I think that the Shield example was quite nice. I have a separate show called the Mindful Past podcast, which I wanted to plug here for it. But in there, we talk about vitality and, wellness and well-being. And I do it with a vitality expert called Harry Kalamios. And he lives and breathes vitality. He doesn't have blue light looking glasses on at night. He reads different gadgets and things to keep him optimal. But people think that means he can never feel down. But we have different buckets. And so sometimes, Nick, I probably lack a bit of community. I get so isolated in where I live my life. He lives it a bit like Brian Johnson, in the Blueprint. He says that sometimes I lack that human element. I can feel really down despite having everything else optimized, because I haven't optimized just one of those buckets. And I bring up back to your resilient question now, or the way that you put it, was actually you can feel optimized in many ways. You only often need sometimes that one thing that isn't quite right. And that's where we need that support and that element to bring it up to speed. I think your values piece was really interesting as well. I'm going to really reflect on that and come back to it. But of course, in your business at Cloud FM, you've also embraced the world of AI. And I want to bring this up because it's not just about looking after our people from that holistic perspective. It's also looking after them by making sure they've got the tools to be efficient, do their job effectively. And you've been quite a pioneer at Cloud FM in leveraging AI to empower your teams. Tell us a little about that, because it's still a buzzword. People are still interested in knowing how they can leverage it more effectively for their HR teams. So I'd love to get a little bit of insight from yourself.
So my background is originally an engineer, and then I learned how to code, and I learned how to build technology. And I didn't build technology because I could. I built technology because I found a way to influence behavior, which was the ultimate aim. How do we get people to behave differently in a more positive environment that's beneficial to them and the world? And of course, AI falls into an IT environment, doesn't it? You've got all these people saying, well, yeah, I've heard AI. I read it on LinkedIn. I read it on the press. I listen to it on Twitter. I listen to it on the TV and on the news. But everyone just plugs it into a bucket that's IT or development. So you tell me, are you using AI to do your IT stuff? What people miss is that AI has been introduced to elevate everybody, IT or not, right? The average layman can use AI to improve their own productivity, their own excitement, their own knowledge, their own, everything, and brings them in a new perspective. So the other subject you hear is about, is AI going to replace us? Right? Again, a cliche statement, but the people that's been a secretary of their life typing letters, and they're now doing it on Word on a computer, and they're now dictating it on a microphone, which is great. Again, but is AI going to replace us? AI is going to enhance the human ability, right? And the question is, are you prepared to give people a playground? Because you do come into challenges about how you use AI and GDPR and your technology and your data and all that sort of stuff. So what we did was we brought a team over from the US last January for a week, and we engaged it with senior people, and I say senior people, not C-suite people, but senior people that are running departments, and we exposed them to the power and the opportunity of AI and how they can use it in their daily lives without engaging anyone from IT department or developers or whatever. How do you actually bring this to life? And they went through a journey, and they came out so pumped because they saw the art of the possible of how they now could become elevated in how they think, how they operate, how they create outcomes, solutions, and benefits in a fraction of the time, which was way, way beyond their thinking. And then with the results that they were getting from using these AI tools, I'll give you one example. One particular lady runs our help desk, and she has major shift challenges with people working nights, weekends, days, etc., etc. And trying to put that together and nourish the various people that want to work nights, don't want to work nights, and so on and so on. And she has to spend like a week and a half every month trying to plan this out. So she was shown by the AI team, well, look, this is a way you can look at it differently. And I'll give you the short version. She went away and played for 45 minutes and said, oh my God, I can now schedule in less than 25 seconds. And it's ticked every single box. And then she demonstrated to us. And she went out going, my life has changed. My life has changed. And she's now freed herself up from like a week and a half of labor and activity doing in a way that she only believed she could do it into a new way of actually doing it because she was exposed to it. So suddenly what's then happened is since January, the entire business outside of IT or development competence, people are using AI to a massively effective state, including our HR team.
Fantastic. Well, I think it's not just AI as well for you, isn't it? I think we've also introduced with some of your engineers like augmented reality stuff to help upskill them. Like you've embraced technology in a multitude of different ways. And I guess it's not being closed-minded if you're listening to this, to some of the kind of solutions that are out there that can just kind of move the needle a little bit. And if you don't mind me asking you, just to bring some of those ideas to life, because there will be people listening to this thinking, you know what, we've got a particular challenge. Maybe they've never considered virtual reality as a potential solution, but for you, I know that it's worked really successfully with some of the engineering work that you've been doing. I wonder if you could just talk to us a little bit about it.
Certainly. Well, it sounds a bit far-fetched, but I want to try and bring it down to reality. So in our world, which is facilities management or engineering, you might be an electrical contractor, a plumber, you might be an air conditioning engineer, you might do extract systems, whatever it is. The challenge we have in FM is we are struggling with labor, skilled labor, which basically means, if you can imagine, and I'll use my specialty skill, which is refrigeration, air conditioning. During the summer, we have that, week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks where it's very hot. And during that summer, everything refrigeration breaks down. And it needs probably 3 times the workforce to meet the demands of that peak. But you can't just get 3 times the workforce off the shelf, right? Because they don't exist. So therefore, you've got clients that go through hell for 3 weeks and then attack the suppliers for failing to achieve stuff, et cetera, et cetera. So I said, how do we solve the labor problem? And what everyone's been saying over the last 15, 20 years is we need better training. We need more frequent training. We need to train more people. I'm saying it never works because you've got people come in the industry, go out in the industry, and you'll never catch up. So I then said, look at the Uber solution. The Uber solution said the demand is people wanting lifts. The restriction is there's only these amount of cab firms. What is the opportunity? Well, the opportunity is there's 1 million people sitting at home with a car that are bored and need money. So how do we bring the demand versus the opportunity? And that's how Uber come alive. So I'm sitting there saying, if you looked at, and I'll simplify, let's say we had 1,000 qualified people in the industry to do this work, but we actually needed 10,000. I'm saying there are 50,000 people sitting there that have got competence that says, I know how to change a light bulb in my house. I know how to change a lock on my front door. I know how to do this, but I'm not qualified to go and earn a living at it. Therefore, if you are competent and you can demonstrate that competency through basic training, I'm going to give you I'm going to give you augmented reality that says, when you get to this problem, I'm going to tell you how to solve it because you've got the competence. What I've now done is I've brought another 10,000 people as a resource availability to solve the problems I've not got to spend the next 6 months, 6 weeks, 6 years training them to do. And that's what the augmented reality is about.
It's very clever. It's very clever. It actually leads perfectly into the question we'll ask, which is bringing, of course, your book to life, which is doing the opposite. And I think you've given some really good examples of where, actually we haven't followed the status quo. You've taken that chance to reflect, as you mentioned earlier, that vital time to sit back and take a kind of top level view, really, and look at things a little bit more differently or strategically through a different lens. And of course, it's led you to a book called Doing the Opposite. I wonder if you can tell us a little bit about what people can find out about in that book. I will, of course, put a link in the show notes for those that are interested in finding out more about your work and what you've got to say now. So if you want to get a copy, you can find it in the show notes as well from Amazon. But yeah, please tell us all about your book.
So because of my story as an entrepreneur has been quite intriguing, I've had people over the last 10 years saying, Jeff, you've got to write a book. You must write a book. I kept saying, no, I'm not interested. It's self-serving. People don't want to read me. And I was really poo-poo and didn't want to know. Until one day I got approached in September 19, I think it was, by an ex-editor of a newspaper, quite a large newspaper. And he said, can we go to lunch? I said, yep, no problem. So I'm always curious and meeting new people. And he said, why don't you write a book? And I went, oh, no, not you as well. So anyway, he listened to my story and I said, that's why. And he went, and he went on to give me a telling off. He said, you have a responsibility to share your knowledge, and you have a responsibility because that's how we evolve. You've got a responsibility to leave a legacy to your family, your kids, and your grandkids. But more importantly, you've got knowledge that will be useful to other people. You've got to share it. So he got me to think about it differently. So I agreed to write the book. And then I was lucky enough because I was given time to write the book, because I started it in January 2020, and then in March we were all locked down anyway. So that gave me time. And the book is not a leadership book. It's not a how-to book. It's simply my story and all the trials and tribulations, warts and all, extremely vulnerable, extremely open, that talks about the good, the bad, and the ugly, and what I did as a result of those things, and where I had success as a result, or where I had failure as a result. And the bit that was interesting, which was never the intention, it was there to actually be a legacy and so on and so on. What surprised me was it got launched in March 2021, and in December 2021, it hit number 1 on Amazon globally. I was sitting proudly above Simon Sinek and Wyatt. And of course, I didn't understand that at all. That was never the intention. I never believed that for a minute, but it's amazing. And the feedback that I had from various people went, "Oh my God, your story is so similar to mine. It really brought it to life, blah, blah." But the story is about, why do I do the opposite? And I didn't know. And part of the journey of the book was going back to my roots, which I was instructed to do, and look at every photograph that was ever taken of me during my childhood to try and understand why I did what I did. And that journey helped me understand. And I articulate that in the book about the reason I do the opposite all come down to my childhood. And it's a fascinating read. And I'm very, very proud of it.
Well, huge congratulations for getting top of the global listings on Amazon. That's no small feat. And funny enough, you mentioned Simon Sinek there. We've talked a little bit today about purpose and why and how important it is. That must have really been quite something when you saw him just below you in the rankings, because I'm sure he's someone you look up to and gone, actually, I quite like his work. So that'd have been quite exciting. Maybe he likes yours. Maybe he loved your book.
Maybe.
Really fascinating conversation, Jeff. Let's open the HR L&D vaults. I'm going to ask you 3 questions now, which hopefully it's something I'm going to like. Start with number 1. If you could give one piece of universal advice to HR leaders today, what would it be?
You have 2 ears and 1 mouth. Listen twice as much as you speak.
Amazing. Love that. I could do with a little bit more of that, probably. That's the elephant and hippo piece for me. Question number 2, reflecting on your career start, what would you change now looking back on your career journey if you were just starting out in this new world of work?
Well, that's a little bit personal to me, because I've written a letter to my 18-year-old self, and basically it says, stop being so cocky, stop pretending you know it all, be more curious, and you will grow much faster.
Amazing. I love that, be more curious. Sometimes that links to that coaching mentality as well, but I think curiosity is something that's massively underestimated, in my opinion, in the world of business. So glad you brought that to life. Last but not least, from your experience, what common trait have you observed in all of the effective leaders or leaders you look up to in the world?
It's not about me.
Okay. Any particular leader that stands out for you in the work that you've done that really embodied that?
There is one there is one particular person who I'm now pleased to say is a good friend of mine, and that's Gary Ridge. And Gary was the chief exec for WD-40 for 25 years. And when you look across every company you can imagine, from Apple to Google to Amazon, you look at their behavior, their levels, the Pepsi-Cola, Coca-Cola, all the big global brands, and you ask about the engagement levels in their businesses, and they're all pretty impressive. They're above the benchmark of 11 or 12% that we've got in the UK. WD-40 is groundbreaking with 96% engagement, and they sell oil in a can. How can that be? And Gary is the guy that placed all of his time and effort and attention into culture and his people, which meant he had the fastest compound growth over 20 years out of every company on the planet.
Amazing. What a fantastic example. And as you said, not something I would have realized. You say the oil in a can, but it just also goes to show no matter who you are representing in your HR capacity, right? Doesn't matter what the sector is, the vertical is, the location, you can still strive to be a number 1. And you can still, whether that's in terms of culture, performance, engagement, wellness, well-being, whatever it is you want to do, there's always an opportunity there for growth. And I think you've highlighted that incredibly well during the course of today's show. Now, of course, if anyone's interested in finding out more about your particular work, there's a couple of websites I'd like to direct people to. There is, of course, jeffdoing.co.uk. That link will be in the show notes if you want to find out more about Jeff's story online. Of course, if you want to find out more about the best-selling book, the one that took Simon Sinek off number 1, then please do so. There'll be a link in the show notes for doing the opposite, and there'll be a link to the Amazon opportunity for you to purchase that book. And, of course, the website for the work that you do at cloudfmgroup.com as well. Worth having a check if you're listening to this, because it does give some really interesting insight into the company that Jeff's created, and a little bit of insight into brings to life some of the things, shall I say, that we've discussed today on today's show. So, Jeff, it's been an absolute pleasure having you today on the HR L&D podcast. Any final thoughts from yourself you'd like to leave with our listeners?
No, other than to say thank you very much. I've enjoyed I've enjoyed the conversation immensely, and great conversations come down to great questions. So you've done a sterling job today, and yeah, thank you for enabling me to actually just be, I guess, very open and honest about how I feel about stuff.
No, you're very kind. You've left me with a question to ponder on. I may have another podcast episode dedicated solely to that topic. Can companies have values? That's going to stick with me for a lot longer than this recording. So I really appreciate that question, if nothing else. That'll allow me to be a bit more curious for myself. Of course, if you are listening to this and you have trouble recruiting in HR related roles or L&D roles, please do get in touch with myself and my team at jjrecruitment.com. That link will also be in the show notes. We've now got offices in the UK, Europe and USA as well. So wherever you need requirements, please do get in touch with our team. I just want to say one final thank you to Jeff Dewing for joining me today on the HR L&D podcast. I look forward to being the next show real soon. Jeff, thank you.
This episode is sponsored by Deal. That's DEEL. Deal is your forever people platform built for global payroll and HR. So whether you're an enterprise business, a small company, or something in between, Deal works for your team. Hire and onboard talent in over 150 countries in minutes and run payroll in over 100 countries in just a few clicks. And with Deal's suite of AI-powered learning and development tools, you can even customize career roadmaps, performance assessments, and more. So are you ready to transform your global payroll and HR processes? If you are, click the link in the show notes to book a demo with Deal today. That's DEEL.